Welcome to Rates and Barrels. It is Monday, February 23rd. Derek VanRiper here with Eno Sarris, getting you caught up on some action from spring games this weekend around the league. We also continue our team preview series, and we got some help with a couple of those teams. Brendan Kuty joins us to talk Yankees. Melissa Lockard joins us to talk A's. And Eno and I will do the two-man booth to cover the 2026 Los Angeles Angels of Anaheim, who will be at the end of this episode because they have the lowest PECOTA projection, and they continue to be a mystery wrapped in a riddle covered in something disgusting that I'm not even gonna. You can choose the thing that grosses you out a little bit.
Artie Moreno quotes.
Yeah, I mean, Artie Moreno quotes are just the absolute best. So we'll get to that in just a little while. But how's it going for you on this Monday?
Good. Got to see the Stanford baseball home opener. Our beefy boy, Rintaro Sasaki. We are big fans of. Didn't do anything for us in that game, but that was a fun moment. And drafted my Bay Area Roto Fantasy League, BARF, in which I just got totally decimated in saves. I think I have Kenley Jansen and Robert Stevenson. So there's a plan for you.
That's not really a plan, is it?
It's the waiver wire is the plan. The projections came out afterwards, and I didn't do too well in them. Although my offense was, like a top 3, top 4 offense. I gave a lot back in pitching, but that was part of my plan because it's a waiver wire league, and sometimes you really need to know your format. If you have a waiver wire league, then you have to know what you're good at. On the waiver wire, and I happen to be pretty good at picking up pitching and picking up saves. I've figured out how to do that by basically floating a high stuff setup guy in on my bench and buying them before they become closers. So, hopefully that strategy will work and clean up all the messes I made in the draft.
Well, there is an overall component in that league because you're playing against the other leagues that are part of the Earth universe, which is a weird way to say it, but there's more than one league vying for an overall title there. So punting saves not ideal, but you could still win BARF. Also weird to say if you're able to just find a few saves, even if you didn't find a way to manage that as well as you would have liked. And I think if you build enough teams, you're going to have a little bit of everything as far as categorical weaknesses. You and I play in enough leagues where you run into some different problems over the course of draft season because everything plays out a little bit differently. Some news you should know, baseball news you should know on this Monday. Joe Ryan was scratched from his scheduled start on Saturday. Twins can't catch a break on the health front, although the MRI only revealed inflammation, according to the Athletic's Dan Hayes. So this one could be much, much worse, but I think it does maybe put the availability of Joe Ryan for the World Baseball Classic into question, right? If he's got something barking in his back, even if it's just inflammation, they may want to ramp him up a bit more slowly than having him pitch in that tournament.
Could be good news for him long term. There's a chance that for at least starting pitchers, at least, that the WBC is an early ramp up period that may affect them injury wise during the season. I haven't seen a definitive research that I believe to be definitive on this, but it makes sense. You're not normally throwing your hardest when the WBC is playing. In other springs, so that could be it could be a benefit here that he slow walks the spring, doesn't do the WBC, and gives you more like 150, 160 innings this year.
Yeah, more to come on that, but it does appear that Joe Ryan avoided a lengthy absence as a result of that MRI turning up only inflammation. I did notice in some of the drafts that I have going on, many slow drafts, the Listener League draft, I've got an online championship that I'm doing with our buddy JH right now. There is a nice discount on Jackson Holliday in some drafts. And you think about it just compared to Corbin Carroll and Francisco Lindor, guys that would go in the first round or right around the first round in the case of Lindor. They're only falling 10 to 15 picks for the most part from what I've seen. But Jackson Holliday falling maybe 100 picks in that online championship it's a pretty steep discount, which got us wondering a little more about what we're worried about. Are we more worried about them slow playing his return because of their infield depth? Are we more worried about Jackson Holliday losing some time against lefties. Like, why would he get such a steep discount? I realize you're going to fall more at that part of the board than you do if you're an elite player, but that seems like an overcorrection if that becomes anything resembling a norm for Jackson Holliday's new draft day price.
Well, I think that if you maybe where you were buying him before, you were baking in some optimism and saying, hey, this is a 22-year-old that has held his head above water, in 2025 and was near league average. But I'm banking on more power when I'm picking him here. I'm banking on 22, 25 homers and maybe an outside shot at 30-30 or whatever. Like, I'm banking on upside, and I think that a Hamate injury just kind of takes some of the air out of that balloon. So maybe there's a possibility he was being overdrafted before. And that could still be, this could still be an overcorrection. But if he was being overdrafted before and the Hamate injury takes some of the helium out, that could be why the drop was so drastic. I would say probably, a 50 pick discount already. You're starting to see some, possibility of upside. Also, we are in draft and hold season, and just the idea that maybe he misses a whole month. What are you going to do? Who's going to play at that second base spot for you while you're waiting? Maybe when we get into waiver wire season, when we get into the season where people have injury list, spots where they can stash him, his pick goes back up. But at the 100 seems too much to me.
Had a couple of fallers in my listener league that could be solutions to a problem like that. Otto Lopez was available, like probably 50 picks later than usual. I don't think there was any specific reason. I didn't see any news on him. I think we like him as a regular in that Marlins lineup to start the year.
And even if you're desperate, if it's a really deep league, you could just pick Blaze Alexander super late and basically get the guy who's going to play for him most likely.
Yeah. I don't think Alexander is going to cost more than like a 40th round pick. I mean, it's just it's more of a small side platoon super sub sort of role for him. Colt Keith was the other guy that fell quite a bit. And what I was starting to do in the listener league, I should really give away my strategy while that league's still happening. I was really looking for my first couple of bench hitters to have multi-position eligibility. I mean, I got 2 already, so I kind of did what I needed to do. And the reason why I wanted that was because I feel like later on, when you're taking more playing time risk, there's a chance you're getting zeros from some of the guys on the deep part of your bench. So you need some of those first hitters up to have some versatility. And I really hadn't built in a lot of versatility across my starters. That core group of 14 hitters, I think, had absolutely nobody who could play more than one spot. So it became really important for me to ensure that I had a little bit of that within the expected to use regularly group of hitters, because I had none.
People ask me if I got sniped, and the one snipe that did hurt is Josh Smith, because he's been my one-man answer to the question you just posed is, who is a starting level player? I think he's a, 10 homer, 10 stolen base, 15 homers, 15 stolen base guy who will be the regular starter at second base, and he's available. He's can play everywhere in terms of eligibility. So I especially love that he plays at first base. Along with all those other ones. So, I did get sniped there. But I agree with you. My 2 of my early picks off of the bench are Miguel Vargas and Chase Mydroth, where I cover my entire infield with 2 players. And every time that you get a player that has multi-eligibilities that you actually think you would play, as much as I've been there's some people making fun of me a little bit for the Javier Sanoa. I'm going to bring him up again. I'm going to pump him up. He's this year's Billy Cook. He's not an early pick. He's a Band-Aid in 15-team leagues really late. And it's not a very good Band-Aid because I'm not actually expecting him to start. So it's better to get guys like Vargas and Mydroth who you expect to start and have multi-eligibility, because every one of those multi-eligibilities buys you another pitcher, basically. And every time you can buy yourself a pitcher by doing that, you want to do that because you want to fit as much pitching on there, as you can.
Yep, I think that's a really good way to think about those draft and hold builds. We did have spring games get underway over the weekend, not just the college schedule underway, but actual spring training games were happening, and I was wondering if you had any early takeaways. Mine was that we did get 2 scoreless from J.R. Ritchie in his Braves spring debut, and we've talked about some of the questions they have with the injuries piling up, with Spencer Schwellenbach on the 60-day IL. I think J.R. Ritchie is quietly moving up my boards as someone who's going to have importance for this team, right? A good prospect in that organization. And when you look at someone like Bryce Elder or Joey Wentz, two guys that maybe will be in the rotation together because they could use a six-man with 13 consecutive days with a game to begin the season. I don't see Elder and Wentz being good enough to keep a high-end prospect like Ritchie from breaking through if he's actually one of their 5 best starters early on in the season.
Yeah, and the shallower your league is, the more interested you are in Ritchie than Elder and Wentz. I'm not even really interested in Elder and Wentz in deep leagues. So, Ritchie catches my eye. I would like to know what's going on with Didier France's shoulder, but Ritchie is obviously more polished. And I think getting a chance this early after they've gotten some poor health news is meaningful. Sometimes you can read between the lines of how someone's being used and when they're being used and sort of understand what's happening. I'm going to try and get, we have Hawkeye in every stadium. And so we're going to have some regular Stuff Plus dumps and may even have a little bit of a leaderboard that I might be able to share either on the Discord or publicly. We'll see. But I'm looking at an early version of the leaderboard, and one guy that's highlighted that's really interesting is Robert Garcia had a 112 Stuff Plus in his first outing. And I just think that he's a linchpin for people like me that sometimes are reaching for saves at the end of the draft and need somebody that is in the role most likely and has good stuff. Robert Garcia, versus a Riley O'Brien who's hurt right now. I'd move Garcia above Riley O'Brien right now.
We do have, for draft and hold purposes, a few relievers we're going to talk about later on in this episode. Maybe one in the Yankees bullpen, a familiar closer who's not in that chair right now that might be worth stashing away later on your roster. And then, of course, the A's, kind of an unknown as to who the favorite is to close there. So Melissa Lockard will help shed some light on that here for us in just a little while. All right, leading us off today for our team preview series is Brendan Kuty. Brendan covers the Yankees here at The Athletic. And Brendan, first off, thank you for joining us again. And secondly, why are they running it back with this position player group? I mean, I know they weren't bad last year. They won 94 games, but I find it strange that the Yankees would just say, yeah, we're good. Let's just let's bring the whole band back together on the hitting side and everything will work even better than it did in 2025.
Well, look, if you look at how they went into the offseason, the biggest hole they were going to have there was 2 holes in their outfield. It was losing Trent Grisham and losing Cody Bellinger. And what do? They replaced Cody Bellinger and Trent Grisham with Cody Bellinger and Trent Grisham. And they weren't the problems last year, right? And really the offense wasn't the problem last year. The Yankees offense, I believe, led the league in runs scored. Aaron Judge, of course, did Herculean things. You're hoping for another one of those type seasons from him, but you're looking at possibly a step up in Ben Rice in a year 2 of him getting full-time at bats. You're hoping from a bounce back from Austin Wells. Is Trent Grisham in his 30 home runs for real? Like the offense, Trent Grisham, Jazz Chisholm is coming off of a 30-30 year. So I get them returning the position player unit. And now it's about the pitching. Can the pitching hold up? Specifically, can the pitching get through April, May-ish before Carlos Rodon comes back? Then Garrett Cole comes back. And then Clark Schmidt comes back. And what does the bullpen look like leaving spring training and later in the season when those starters start to collapse into relief roles?
Yeah, on the offensive side, last year we have this thing called the Rule of 5, which is the 5 guys that are everyday players. You can, with a 4-man bench, you can platoon the other guys. Last year it was obviously Judge, Bellinger, Jazz, and then Grisham and Volpe. This year, I think Judge, Bellinger, Jazz there. Who do you think are the next 2 regular guys? I mean, do we just say shortstop to be named later? Is Ben Rice an everyday guy? Is Grisham an everyday guy? I mean, he seems like somebody you would actually platoon. So where do you think the platoons start and the regulars end? I guess everyone's really asking about Ben Rice because they signed Goldschmidt and they could platoon him.
Right. So I don't think so. I don't think they'll platoon him. I think anything, you'll see Goldschmidt come in on tough lefties, on days where Rice could use a blow, as a defensive specialist, with a 2-run lead in the 7th inning. I think that's where you'll see Goldschmidt. Look, he signed for 12 and a half in 2025. He signed for 4 this time around. I think you're looking at Jazz full-time, Kuty full-time, Judge full-time. I think you're looking at Rice full-time. You're probably looking at a lot of Austin Wells because JC Escara is another left-handed backup. And yeah, those are the real guy in Caballero. Going into the season, waiting for Anthony Volpe to get healthy.
Yeah, because even though Volpe's had his issues, once he's healthy, you still operating under the assumption. I mean, the cleanup was worse than he thought. It seems like it affected him more than maybe he was letting on. And with Paul DeJong being the third guy there, basically Caballero's every day until Volpe's every day, something like that. Does that sound about right?
That sounds exactly right. McMahon, I think, will get the majority of the reps at third base, but you'll see Rosario get in there against lefties a good amount. You'll see Grisham do his platoon thing a little bit against lefties. But that leaves you to wonder who's playing left field in those situations, because Jason Dominguez, like on the roster on paper, doesn't make a ton of sense. So do they send him down to AAA? I think that's really realistic. I think that really might happen. So those are some of the questions I have. But again, on the offensive side, I do think they look pretty good, barring. I'm sorry, Giancarlo Stanton. He's healthy. He looks good in camp so far. He's in good spirits. No one is saying that you're going to get 162 games from Giancarlo this season, but he's another cog in that lineup that, as long as he's healthy, he's in there playing every day against both sides.
Yeah, that's the thing about Stanton that's kind of interesting, is like you get partial seasons because sometimes he has the devastating injury that wipes him out, but on a day-to-day basis, they do lean on him pretty heavily when he's not on the IL. And thinking about how his health maybe impacts Jason Dominguez too. Dominguez got to 429 plate appearances in part because Stanton had the dreaded double tennis elbow that no one in the history of humanity has ever been diagnosed with before. Stanton ended up with 281 plate appearances. I mean, it wouldn't surprise me if you just flipped those totals. If you're looking at Dominguez as someone that might be on the outside looking in for opening day, if he's more of an up and down guy, that really changes the shape of what his season's going to look like compared to a year ago, even though it's the same group back in place. That's the weird thing for me.
Yeah, I don't think you look at him as an up and down guy. I think he either has a role or he doesn't. I don't know who you'd send down to get him up, right? The Yankees probably look when Volpe comes back, they might be inclined to use Caballero more in right field or left field. Use Rosario more in right field or left field. Give those guys shots. They've done it before a little bit. So that's where I think you start seeing those things happen. But with Dominguez, yeah, I don't know what the answer is, because unless they're willing, look, he's a good he can hit righties. So if Grisham needs a bit of a blow, you can play him. But the problem is that Grisham hits righties too. So yeah, I don't have an answer there for you.
Not an easy fit. Like long term, he may be interesting still, but short term, it seems like he's in a tough spot, and the defensive fit is a big part of that. I don't think they're going to go to him in center. So, I don't even know what happens after this year. Actually, it just seems like a big trade candidate to me.
He seems like a big trade candidate, but like, what's his value? Teams would know that the Yankees don't have a real spot for him right now, and teams will look at him as, they would say, can't hit lefties and doesn't play anywhere but left field and does that poorly.
Platoon corner outfielder is not like, doesn't have a ton of value. I mean, to a team like maybe the Marlins or something, it'd be like, well, we can see if that's all he is. We can give him a full season and play him against lefties. And
yeah, I mean, Bernie Williams early in his career was not the switch hitter he became. He needed time to get there. Those early 90s Yankees teams gave him that time because they were not good. But this team
Yeah,
is good.
this team doesn't have that. It's the Volpe's the only guy that was sort of allowed to, because of his defense. He was allowed to kind of, get suffer some of the slings and arrows of being a young player. It's been a little bit difficult for other guys on the pitching side. I think things are a little bit different. I mean, this is great depth. I'm putting up on the board right now for those watching on YouTube. All of the starters. I don't even have Clark Schmidt on here. So, there's 10 viable starters on this team. I have them sorted by projected ERA, and it goes Fried, Cole, Schlittler, and I think those three guys, if everybody's healthy, those three guys are in there. And maybe no one will. Maybe there won't be a moment this year where everyone's healthy. But can you fill out the back end of the rotation if everyone's healthy at the same time? Let's say it's June, and everyone is ready to go. And I'm assuming you put Rodon in there, and then what happens after that?
If it's 2024 Luis Heel, he's in there. If it's everything that the Yankees say that Ryan Weathers can be, it's Ryan Weathers.
Yeah.
Will Warren got third. I think he might have led the Yankees in starts last year, Will Warren. And he's, it really held his own and was really good at times. So there's Will Warren who's up there. And then you're looking at Ryan Yarborough, who had a good 8-10 start stretch with the Yankees last year, collapsing back into the bullpen. I know right now they're stretching out Paul Blackburn. I don't think anyone expects Paul Blackburn to be fully stretched out to a starter length, but they're going to get him up to like 50 pitches or so. And then it's the two prospects, Elmer Rodriguez and Carlos Legrande. I think that
Who look
Legrande,
really good in camp, right?
who?
Like I've been hearing that Legrande looks really great in camp, and
Yeah, he's look. I was inclined to think that when he was hitting 103 or whatever it was the other day, that the Yankees' guns might have been a little hot at the stadium. But a scout who was at the game the other day watching Legrande was like, that was coming out firm.
okay.
that was real. So yeah, he's looked great so far. But you talk to the Yankees, they're telling you that this guy can use a little bit of finishing off a AAA. They believe right now, but
yeah, the command is not amazing.
But that could change, right? Luis Heel a couple of years ago was an early cut of big league camp, sent down to big league camp on like March 2, and then made the rotation, and then was rookie of the year.
Amazingly, Heel, Weathers, and Warren all still have options. So I wouldn't predict them being sent down, but seems like somebody could be sent down. Also, in terms of moving to the pen, Heel and Weathers seem to have the kind of arsenals that could easily port over to the pen, and I guess the pen could use one or two more power arms, right? It's I like Bednar, I like Duvall, but this is not like a normal Yankees pen. I feel like it's not as deep as it usually goes.
No, this is not Miller, Betances, Chapman.
Yeah, right. Yeah, that was
right?
a good one.
Like you got three guys down there who, when they're going good, they're going good. But Bednar looked good with the Yankees last year. He also got sent down at the beginning of last year with the Pirates. Duvall looked good towards the end of the year with the Yankees last year, but he also looked like a mess when he got to the team. Fernando Cruz gets hurt. Like, who knows what that's going to look like. So, you really got to kind of cross your fingers through April and May to see if you can put those reserve starter arms in the bullpen. Like you said, Ryan Weathers, left-handed, already hitting 98 miles an hour this spring. Luis Heel, you would think his stuff could go to the bullpen, but again, as a guy who was a rookie of the year, do you want to pull that cord on him so quick? And the Yankees want to give Legrande and Rodriguez as long of a leash as they can as starters, because that's what you do, and they have the luxury of time to do that. But there's, history is filled with young pitchers who started as relievers and then went back to starting. And if the Yankees want to just throw 100 billion miles an hour at people in May and June and July and let Legrande's fastball just eat out of the bullpen, that's huge.
it looks like, in terms of depth charts, he's got a little bit more of a chance of making an impact in the bullpen this year. I mean, it's like we're saying from the beginning here, this is a crowded starting pitcher depth chart. It's going to be hard for him to reach past like a Clark Schmidt and a Luis Heel, as a rookie. So,
well, the thing is, Schmidt probably past the All-Star break. Heel, we'll see what he does, right? The fastball is still a little bit down. It's also early spring. So we'll see if he can get himself back up to where he was in 2024 when he was pumping 97 consistently. I think he was at 94.9 or 94.5 in his start yesterday. That's not great for him. But also last year when he was doing that, there was some talk like this was his plan. Like he was trying to take his foot off the gas a little bit at points so he'd have more later after watching guys like Max Fried, after watching guys like Garrett Cole do that. But maybe he's got to go back to just being the guy who shoves from the first inning on.
Cam Schlittler was just amazing last year. Started the season at Double-A. Obviously, he was very important in the second half into the playoffs as well. From a workload perspective, I think one thing really jumps off the page. He got well over 150 innings across the regular season and the playoffs, so there really shouldn't be any sort of kid gloves on him whatsoever this year. Maybe the depth allows them to skip a turn or something if they need to, but do you see Schlittler as being just a notch above all the other guys we've been talking about here? Is his spot in the rotation actually very safe despite having basically a half season's worth of big league experience under his belt?
Yeah, I mean, you're looking at Max Fried, Carlos Rodon, Cam Schlittler. I don't think that anyone is going into this camp saying that Cam is not in the New York Yankees starting rotation on opening day. This offseason, he was very cognizant of his workload. He had set a career high in 2024, set a career high in 2025. Yankees pitching staff had him take 2 extra weeks off. This actually wasn't the pitching staff, it was a training staff who said, take 2 extra weeks off this offseason. Just let your arm hang for a while and build yourself up more slowly. And that's what he's done. He changed a little bit about his throwing this offseason as well to just rehab from the amount of innings he had last year. But, he expects to log a ton of big league innings this year. So I think that his spot is absolutely safe. I know I said Rodon, he's not starting the year until May, but, Max Fried, then it's Cam Schlittler, Will Warren, Luis Heel, Ryan Weathers, in whatever order.
Yeah, it's that 3 through 5 where I feel like things are very much written in pencil, and a lot of that is riding on health and even just some inconsistencies with stuff that you mentioned with Heel as well. One last roster-specific question, Brendan. If David Bednar struggles, are fantasy managers out there right to assume that Camilo Doval gets the first crack at the 9th inning? Because this, to me, is one of those situations where I think Bednar is good when he's on, but he's shown us enough downside where a couple of wobbles is enough for him to maybe turn that role over to someone else, especially since Doval has pretty extensive experience closing from his time with the Giants.
Sure. If you look at Bednar and you look at his 2023 when he pitched in the WBC, he also had his best season that year. I think historically, and look at the numbers, guys. I only do this for a living. I should know this. I don't think he starts well. I don't think he starts seasons well all the time. But having that runway with the WBC, I think he had that in mind, saying to himself, I pitched really well a full season last time in the WBC. I got my engine going sooner, and I'm going into a contract year. This is a platform year for him. So I think those 3 things combined leads you to lean on David Bednar having a rather really great season, but Doval's got to be that guy, right? I think Cruz could do it. I think Cruz has the moxie to pitch in the 9th inning for the New York Yankees, but Doval is just electric. His stuff crackles coming out of his arm.
Your intuition was right. His March, April is the second worst month split of his career. 3.83 ERA against a 3.15 career number. So there you go.
Yeah. So look, I think that if things hold, this should be a good season, a great season for Bednar, and the Yankees are banking on it. But Doval's got to be that second chance guy because he's done it with the Giants. His stuff is stupid. and he looked good toward the end of late last year. The Yankees had him in their system, in their pitching system all off season to get to know him better and what makes him tick.
Yeah, maybe some keeper and dynasty appeal there too, depending on Bednar's future, because Doval could be the next guy up in the long run, even if he doesn't really get that many chances in 2026. We've been looking at the PECOTA win total projections for every club and then grading it on the too hot, too cold, just right Goldilocks porridge scale. 88.6 is the number for the Yankees. How do you feel about that, Brendan?
It better be over that.
Is it just based on the energy of the readers and the people around you?
I mean, they'll come to my house with pitchforks and burn my place down if I come out here and say, yeah, 88 wins sounds like enough for the New York Yankees. If you're going to tell fans, hey, we're running it back, and oh, by the way, we're going to win 6 less games, they're going to tell you to go straight to hell. So
hey, you got Garrett Cole coming back, right? That's probably good enough to keep you at last year's level.
Sure. 88.6 feels light. I feel like that's not going to win the AL East. And if the Yankees don't win the AL East, there will be riots. And really just because, fans like new shiny toys, right? Fans like,
and you didn't give them any of those.
yeah, they like excitement in the off season. Last year it was Max Fried, Paul Goldschmidt, Devin Williams, Cody Bellinger. The year before that it's Juan freaking Soto. And this year it's
Ryan Weathers. Come on.
Well, it's
get the people excited about Ryan Weathers.
It's the same team.
Yeah.
So
it's mostly the same.
Yeah. So you fans are saying we've seen this show already. We know how it ends, and the Yankees have to let them know, like, no, this is the remix.
Nobody cares about your numbers, nerd, but they're projected for the 3rd best WAR total in baseball, just a half win behind the Blue Jays. So I think this is incredibly too light. I think it doesn't make sense. I think this should project as a 94-95 win team again. I think whatever you might have lost in aging from last year, or whoever was having I don't even remember, who do you think had a career year last year? It's not like you're going to be like
Grisham.
That guy. Yeah. Okay. So Grisham regresses, but you get more Cole. I think 94-95. That's what I think.
Yeah. Even if Judd doesn't put up his 97th straight 200 OPS plus season, you're expecting more from Ben Rice. If Jazz doesn't go 30-30 again, it still should be a pretty good year from him and a rebound from Austin Wells.
A full year of McMahon. That's nothing.
And you got a full year of defense from McMahon, who's really, really good defensively.
I've wondered if McMahon's a little bit underrated from a fantasy perspective because he costs almost nothing. You mentioned he will lose some time against lefties. Maybe it's even a strict platoon because of who they have on the bench, with Rosario being among the options, but not having to go in and out of Colorado and working with new coaches for a full year with the Yankees, the veteran that's always hit the ball pretty hard. I just think there's a chance Ryan McMahon's actually quietly really good for the Yankees this year.
Yeah, and add that to Jake Bird and Angel Chevilla. I'm not pronouncing his name right. The Yankees, when they got Bird, when they got Chevilla, they put them through their pitching car wash for the first time. And the feedback from Bird and Angel was, we've never done this before because we've been in the Stone Age in Colorado where they didn't have iPads, but they had tablets of stone and granite.
Oh, wow. They didn't have iPads. That's an interesting choice.
That's not true. I was making an old reference, but
you got a
no,
Flintstones joke in there. Very nice.
Yeah. Their golf carts were feet powered. But no, this is the first time these guys are getting under a real expensive ass microscope. So the same thing for Ryan McMahon. He's got all the Yankees tools at his disposal, and while the Yankees have had success and failures in developing hitters over the years, McMahon's shown that he's done it in the major leagues before with pop, with a good OPS, with high strikeouts. But everyone has a career eventually. Yeah,
maybe this will be the year for Ryan McMahon. Brendan, we appreciate your time and your insight. If you want to throw an off-season grade out there for Brian Cashman in the front office, we're happy to take one of those too. I'm guessing it's not coming in very favorably.
I don't have a teaching degree. guys.
You're gonna weasel out of it. I love
Yeah,
it.
I got an A on my chest. I mean, like, I think everything's just great.
I think they did a little bit of their homework ahead of time by getting Bednar and Duvall at the deadline last year with the anticipation of not retaining Williams and Weaver, right? And I think sometimes, as you mentioned, with shiny new toys in the offseason and dominating the offseason being something the Yankees have done generally well for most Yankees fans' lifetimes, there's disappointment in not continuing that over the winter. But I don't think it's as bad. If you look at it outside of New York compared to as a Yankees fan, I think the grades would come in a little higher outside of New York.
Yeah, look, every year I cover the Yankees, things happen that I just don't expect to happen. Double tennis elbow. Who knows? Beginning of the year, you say one thing and then the other thing happens and the Yankees still end up in the playoffs. So if they end up with the Pacoda projected win total, that's an F off season. You get to Monday morning quarterback that. But if they do what, their projected WAR total is, which is what I think they probably care about and base things more off of, then they're looking like they did the right thing. And like you said, a lot of homework done in last trade deadline because they were able to take that, ride it, and say, we're going to run it back. Asterisk Garrett Cole.
Our in-season acquisition is already done in 2026.
Fans love that, by the way. Fans love that so much. They're like, oh man, we're getting a Cy Young. Well, we just traded for a Cy Young winner, Garrett Cole.
Thank you so much for the time today, Brandon. We look forward to catching up with you again here once the season gets underway.
Thank you guys for having me.
Well, now it is time to talk about the Athletics. It will take me forever to not say Oakland in front of Athletics. And anytime we talk A's on this show and we need a guest, we reach out to Melissa Lockard, who I think is among the all-time leaders in Rates and Barrels guest appearances. Melissa, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me back.
Hey, we appreciate the insight all the time. And this is a team that hasn't changed a lot since last season, but they're still really interesting. And the big question will be pitching. We'll get to the pitching in just a few minutes. On the hitting side, Jeff McNeil is the most prominent new face. You do have Andy Ibanez in the mix as well. No more JJ Bleday, no more Luis Urias. One thing we like to do on these team previews, we kind of talk about the core five, the guys that must be everyday players because you can't mix and match every spot on the roster. But it seems pretty easy to identify that with this group. I look at Brent Rooker and Nick Kurtz, Tyler Soderstrom and Jacob Wilson as four kind of easy everyday guys. And then Shea Langoliers plays more than most catchers, but we don't always throw the catcher in that group because you do need to roster two of them. So the real question is Lawrence Butler an every single day type player, health permitting, or is there actually a little bit of platoon risk there because that is a spot where they could mix and match if they wanted to?
Yeah, I mean, I think what you said there, the health permitting is probably the biggest driver of it. We won't know till he gets out to, game play probably midway through the spring, how those knees are looking. I mean, it is a bit concerning someone his age, not only having surgery on one knee, but having tendonitis in the other. So, and his legs are pretty important to his game, obviously. But, if he is able to have recovered fully from it, I don't see them platooning him against left-handed pitchers as a rule. I mean, I think, he's been given that responsibility to handle, at bats against lefties so far in his career. And they've invested a lot of money in him. So, I think he'll get a run there. But, they've got Colby Thomas that they could go to if they want a right-handed hitter in that spot. It sounds like Zach Geloff's going to get some outfield work this spring as well, assuming he's healthy, which, I think obviously the shoulder. But he's someone again who, like, if he's swinging a bat pretty well and he's athletic enough, he could definitely play out there and probably all three outfield spots pretty well. So, so you might see a little bit of mix and matching, but I think if he's healthy, I wouldn't see Lawrence getting fewer than 140 games, in a particular season.
Yeah, unfortunately, his strikeout rate is the underlying stuff is not so great against lefties. He struck out a third of the time against lefties and a quarter of the time against righties. So, there might be something there about how he sees the ball. He famously made that big leap forward when he kind of changed the way he worked his head at the plate. But he's so young still at 25. I think, there could be a step forward there where he figures out what to do against lefties and figure something out that works against them. So
Yeah, and he sees a lot of pitches. I think that helps the lineup a lot, just even if he's struggling, which is important too.
Yeah, I think you're right to point out that health is going to figure out some of the other stuff, because Jeff McNeil would be the other player that could play every day, and he is a lefty as well, but his splits are a little bit more relaxed, over the course of his career, maybe just because he makes a ton of contact, but he's been above average against lefties for his career. I mean, you could say, hey, he plays every day. I think, it's more like, both McNeil and Butler play every day if they're healthy, and maybe there's some load management on those knees for Butler more, and maybe that happens to be on lefties, but not sort of a strict platoon situation. I'm interested in what happens in center, because then you could, if you focus on defense, you could make Denzel Clark an everyday guy. And I think after knee surgery and even before it, Butler wasn't the most amazing center fielder. So do you think that Denzel Clark's glove is going to keep him out there every day, or how does Colby Thomas? You pay attention a lot to the minor leaguers as they're coming through. How does Colby Thomas's defense look, in center?
Yeah, I mean, there's a big drop off between Denzel Clark and anyone else you're going to put out center field, right? Like, I think that's a big thing, and I think for this team, the hitting is the strength. So there are spots where I think you can give up offense for the glove, and I think center field would be a pretty important one. I mean, he made a huge impact even when he wasn't hitting the ball at all, and then he just started to hit the ball, Clark, last year before he got hurt again. So I think I would play him every day. I don't know if the A's have been a little bit more quick to bench guys that don't make regular contact than I would have assumed they would, especially when they're the younger guys. Thomas is, a guy who makes a lot of contact. He doesn't necessarily have the impact on the ball that Clark does when he's swinging well. And he can handle center, but I don't know that he's, gonna be a standout there. But in general, up the middle, if McNeil's playing second base and Geloff isn't, and you don't have Clark at center, that's a fairly large downgrade, I think, defensively, in a spot that they need help, because they do have a lot of pitchers, especially in the bullpen, that pitch to contact. And so I would assume Denzel gets a pretty long look, and as long as he's able to stay healthy, which again has been an issue for him throughout his career too.
Yeah, run prevention is just going to be like such a key. Like, playing great defense will go a long way towards reducing the difficulty of playing half your games at Sutter Health Park. I mean, that's such an uphill battle for that entire group of pitchers. I think the other question with Clark is just, where do you think we're headed in terms of a strikeout rate? 38.4% in the debut is only 159 plate appearances. He's always had some swing and miss, but I think it's scaring people away from a fantasy perspective. Do you see Clark being capable of making those adjustments? And did you think we saw enough of that, maybe even as he was getting more experience in the big leagues before injuries cut that season short?
Yeah, he has always been someone who starts slowly at every level that he's been at. I think you can kind of look back at all of his minor league stops, with the exception of really low A. And there's been a pretty significant struggle at the start of it. And then he kind of finds his way and he gets in there. And I think you were starting to see that. He's definitely going to be a guy that swings and misses a lot if he's allowed to swing for power. I mean, one of the things that had happened with him in AAA is he had started to try to be more of a contact hitter, which, worked. I mean, he cut his strikeout rate some, but he has really big power. And I think if I'm looking at a center fielder, I'd rather have a guy that's going to strike out 28% of the time, 30% of the time, and hit 20 homers than a guy who's, popping up a lot of making contact that doesn't really do anything. Obviously the speed's there if he can get on base, but he's a guy who could easily hit 20 homers and maybe hit 210. And I think he'd still be a really strong player, just given the fact that the defense is so good and he can steal some bases for you. So I think part of it is just figuring out who he is, right? And being satisfied with the fact that he's not going to be the perfect player, but the stuff that he gives you is so valuable, you might as well go with that. So if strikeouts are an issue for what you're looking for, I would definitely probably not have him at the top of your list. And I do think his glove is obviously going to be the most impactful part of his game. But if he is playing every day and he's back to the hitter that he naturally is, I could see getting to 20 homers, especially in that ballpark, if he's playing pretty regularly. And probably, 15 to 20 stolen bases if he's getting on base enough.
Speaking of that ballpark, I think it's a natural transition from the hitting to the pitching, but especially, Clark is so important there, I think, because of how the outfield plays. We've talked a lot on the pod about, the wind there and the fact that it's a minor league stadium, so it doesn't have the sort of wind blocking that a major league stadium has. I didn't have the chance to show you this chart before we got on air, but I just looked at the batting results in Sutter Health Park by month, and I found something fairly interesting. Now, this isn't corrected for quality of contact, and I haven't modeled this out, and so this isn't the most robust way of looking at things. It's just looking at results on the field, but there's a fairly stark first half and second half split. And since this has to do with wind mostly, I wonder if that's a possibility that it's actually just less windy in Sacramento in July and August and September. There's a difference. I mean, May, there was a 475 slugging allowed in Sutter Health Park. I mean, that is ridiculous. The league average is 405 or something. I mean, that's just everyone's slugging like Kurtz. That went down a little bit in July and August to 450, 440, 430. And just generally across the board, it played a little better in the second half. Did you hear anything or notice anything watching them? Like, was there anything anecdotal that goes along with this, that it kind of made KB a little bit more manageable as the season went on?
That's interesting. I mean, I think obviously the weather does change there pretty dramatically from the start of the year to the middle. You have it's not the same marine layer effect that, of course, you get in the Bay Area, but Sacramento's, there's a lot more of that colder at night, and that sort of the wind patterns are definitely very different. And when you
wetter,
get to September,
foggier,
yeah,
early in the year.
it's really like kind of just dry and still. They didn't have nearly as hot a summer, though, as they often do. So it's kind of hard to even make that sort of a long-term outlook for it, just because, we really didn't see a typical Sacramento summer where you might get, several days in the hundreds or whatever.
Well, that's a really good point, because, if the wind results die down and it becomes less windy, but then it's also 100, degrees, then you get the weather effect, like the sort of warmth effect. So it's not ever really going to be a great place to play.
Really no humidity, right? Like once it gets to summer, you don't get any humidity there at all. So it'll be interesting to see. I mean, I think the anticipation of what the weather was going to do maybe was less than what they had, because it wasn't a typical, hot summer. It'll be interesting in year two what they can play out with that. But I do also think that, like, if you look at May in a and that's when they kind of, their whole season spiraled out of control. They lost all those games in a row. They really went from being somebody who, maybe could have stuck around in the race for a little bit to just absolutely collapsing. And I do think that's been one of the issues the last several years, has been that when they get into a spiral, it's been very hard for them to get out for whatever reason. And I don't know if it's home or road that makes a difference so much. It's just they haven't been able to dig out of those spirals quickly enough to save their seasons. But when they're playing well, they seem to be able to kind of keep their heads above water. So maybe as these guys are getting older, I mean, you talked about that core, 4 or 5, and, most of those guys are within the first 5-6 years of their careers. Maybe you don't see those spirals as much. You haven't had the veteran guys that you had on the typical teams that were successful back when they were in Oakland that kind of could be stabilizers these last couple of years. But maybe those guys now are mature enough, or, whatever, to be able to kind of be that stabilizing force when things go a little bit sideways. So, but I mean, whatever happened in May, they've got to figure that out, because they're never going to be able to have a season when they have stretches like that is successful.
I think we've reached the point where a lot of people have treated the A's pitching going into this season the way they've historically treated Rockies pitching. It's just a no-fly zone for a lot of fantasy managers. And we were talking before we started recording, they didn't change up a lot about this staff. They did bring in Aaron Savale. It's hard to get veterans who want to pitch in this situation, because it seems like it's kind of catastrophic to your value. And then there's obviously questions about whether the team's even going to contend. How do you see this rotation fitting together? When I look at it, I see maybe Severino, Springs, and Savale as the first 3, but then kind of a wide open opportunity for some guys that got looks last year. So how do you kind of manage the pecking order of the younger starters that are trying to break through and claim these spots for their own?
Yeah, I mean, it is interesting. That had been always the strength, is being able to take kind of marginal guys and make them successful starters. That's what sort of made, the A's click for the last like 15, 20 years. And they really, I think, haven't figured out the formula for doing that quite yet, with this current iteration in the stadium and everything else. And I also think, frankly, developing pitchers at AAA Las Vegas has been an issue. Like this isn't a new thing. It didn't happen just when they moved to Sacramento. It was happening for a few years leading into this. And I don't know that they've figured out the formula for getting guys from Midland to Las Vegas not to completely lose their confidence or be able to throw strikes anymore. Because the strike throwing is what I've noticed has really fallen off. That was something that they were really good at before, and they're not as a general rule. But getting back to your question, I think, like Jacob Lopez was pretty good, all things considered, among that group last year. I think you would have to think that he comes into camp as like, a favorite for one of those top like 4, or fifth starter spots. Luis Morales is a guy, obviously, that they've liked for a very long time. Really struggled those first couple of starts and then kind of settled into looking a lot better after that. I think he's capable of a lot more than what we saw last year, in terms of missing bats and all that. So I'd imagine he gets a pretty long look. Mason Barnett's a guy that didn't pitch nearly as well as they expected him to last year, but I think they have a lot of high expectations. So, he's someone who could factor back in. And then they got a whole bunch of guys that have sort of been either hurt or like have had little moments of, pitching well and not pitching well. Like I think you look at Gunnar Hoglund, you look at JT Ginn, and those are guys that Luis Medina is coming back from Tommy John surgery. I think probably he fits better in a bullpen, but like, you could see him getting some starts as well. So there's just sort of a whole bunch of people until Gage Jump and Jamie Arnold are ready, that you might just kind of see in that first half of the year. And then the second half, yeah, like those two guys in particular could be ready to come up and give them some starts.
It's fascinating that you bring up Las Vegas and then in strike throwing in the same sentence, because when the Blue Jays had Las Vegas, they would famously avoid Las Vegas with their best pitching prospects, and there's got to be something about confidence. Basically command is confidence to some degree, and so you're not going to throw it in the zone if you feel like everything gets blasted, everything in the air is a homer. So but on the other hand, you might argue, if we were in that front office arguing about what to do, you might argue, hey, they need to be ready for Sutter Health Park. So like,
well, they got to be ready
as well
for Las
do
Vegas eventually too, right?
Yeah, and they're good. Yeah. But and in the pen, I think fantasy's been circling around Sterner as maybe the favorite for saves. It's not the best pen. I guess this goes hand in hand with, it's difficult to develop starters. The pen is often littered with extra starters that you converted, and they haven't been able to really do the first thing, so it's hard to do the second thing. But do you think Sterner's going to come out of there as the main guy?
Yeah, I mean, I do think that it was interesting when they did trade Mason Miller. I feel like Mark Kotsay and his group had a lot more freedom to mix and match in those later innings, and they actually, the save percentage didn't fall off that much like you would have expected. Not that they were, necessarily like running off huge amounts of wins, but they had their most successful part of their season, after that trade, which, given that margin of victory is not necessarily huge for those guys, shows you the bullpen was actually surviving pretty well. Another sleeper for that role, I do think Sterner is probably the main guy, but like Hogan Harris is someone that they've mentioned a few times as just being someone that really surprised them how well that he competed in those later innings, and that they really trusted with high leverage spots. And so being left-handed and a guy that doesn't throw 100 is not necessarily someone that I think you're going to say he's the closer, but I could see him getting, especially certain matchup saves, kind of been there, 2-inning saves where he's pitching well enough in the 8th inning, they keep him in there for the 9th. So he's a guy there. And then, I mentioned Medina. I mean, I think they don't know what they have with him, but if he's already throwing 98, he's a guy that, can get up into 100 in a shorter role. If his command is even, somewhat okay, he's the only one that probably in that mix has somewhat similar resembling stuff to what Mason Miller would have had before. So we can see that too. But yeah, I mean, it's really, he's a total, like you don't know what you're going to get from him at all, obviously, because it's been a long time since he's been out there. So
the command is a limiting factor for him, I guess. I mean, the Fangraphs put a 30 present, 35 future, and the walk rates are pretty high. I mean, it makes it hard for him to get the most out of, what looks like pretty good breaking balls and okay fastballs, and he just sprays it. Like, is that what the deal is with him?
yeah, I mean, but the one thing that's been interesting is that both the Yankees and then when he came over to the A's have really sort of kept him in a starter role, even though I think the command has sort of screamed bullpen since he was like maybe in Double-A. And I do sort of wonder if the freedom to like throw 2 pitches, maybe 3, and not have to try to mix and match as much, and to not have to hold back at all either, like just go ahead and throw 100 and see what you're going to do in a shorter outing would do for that command. I don't think he'll ever be a command artist, but I do think it could probably improve in a shorter role. But he's just never, for whatever reason, been put in that role. So I think we'll have to see, what's there. But he's, among the group that's there, I think he's got as much talent as any of those guys, for sure.
Keep waiting to see where Jack Perkins fits into this staff too. They've been pushing him really hard as a starter, and I think you want to keep going down that road as long as you can. But he's a little older; he's 26, so maybe there's a point where they decide you're a high leverage reliever. You're going to give us more than 1 inning at a time, maybe late in games, but he could maybe end up getting saves. I just like him because I think he's good. He will have a role. I just don't like the Park situation at all if I'm taking flyers on my roster for pitching. Melissa, we wanted to ask, just from a broader perspective, we look at the PECOTA win total projections for every team, and the A's come in with a 76.6. Do you think that's too hot, too cold, or just right when you think about the way this position player group has come together, and then thinking about the pitching they currently have at their disposal and some of the guys you've talked about who are maybe just around the corner in the second half?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's fair, right? Like it's pretty similar to the win total they had last year. I think it was 76 wins. So that, given that you're returning essentially the same team, and maybe the pitching's even taken a slight step back, I think that's a fair assessment. I do think that this is a team that could get a lot better in the second half. I mean, I think you are looking at a couple of those pitching prospects. There are some of the younger guys that maybe wobble in the beginning of the year and sort of start to get stronger there. And then I think you also kind of look at, again, like Jamie Arnold, Gage Jump, and then, Leo DeVries, like if he gets to a point where, he'll probably start in Double-A, I would think, because he just got a taste of that at the end of the year. But, I don't know that you spend a ton of time in Triple-A with a guy like that anyway. And defensively, like we talked about up the middle defense, he could make a big difference, not just with the bat, but with his glove. Whether he moves Jacob Wilson to second base or he goes to second, he's a guy that has more defensive ability than I think the guys they have up the middle right now. So, those are people to look for in a second half there. But, I think if you projected them to have a winning record, that would be overly optimistic at this point.
All right, we're going to put that one down as a just right.
Yeah, it seems like a just right to me. I think it is interesting because sometimes you think of where they are in the cycle, and like they seem closer than that, maybe. So I wouldn't be surprised if they just surprised because some of these guys come up, Jump comes up, somebody comes up and and pushes them into winning territory. But they're gonna have a winning team sooner or later. And maybe they're on track to, do it in Vegas when they get there.
Yeah, no, it's kind of, I feel like with them, when they do have that first winning season of any cycles, it's when you don't expect it, right? Like it always is when you're projecting 76 wins or whatever. So whether that's this year or next year or, whatever, I think that'll be interesting. I think the tough thing for them is if they miss a lot of time next year because of a lockout, that's where this cycle could go really off kilter, because I don't think the window is unlimited when you've got these kind of guys like Rooker and stuff that are getting to that middle part of their prime. So that they could be one of those teams yet again, like with COVID, that were hurt more by a lockout than others.
Yeah, it's a really interesting way to think about it. Hadn't thought about it, but I think they are in that kind of timeline. Rooker in particular has become elite. And you wonder how long he can sustain what he's been able to do with what he's I mean, like, it's just like every year the K rate gets better. That can't keep happening for a guy Rooker's age. At least I don't think it can. It'd be fun if it did.
I don't know. He's smart enough to figure it out, but yeah, there is probably a limit too. Smarts can only get you so far. So,
Melissa, we appreciate your time and your insight. We look forward to catching up with you again later on this season.
appreciate it, guys. Thanks so much.
That's Melissa Lockard, one of the great editors here at The Athletic and our resident
My
expert
editor.
on The Athletics. Yeah, Eno's editor. All right, one more team preview to get to today, and it is the Los Angeles Angels of Anaheim. I really don't like what's happening with the Angels right now. Artie Moreno says winning's not that important to fans anyway, so that would probably explain why they're not trying very hard to win. I mean, the front office is trying, but I don't think Artie is giving them the resources to help them get there.
He said something about, how much would it cost to be good? And maybe he's right. I mean, maybe you can't push this roster into contention with money. I mean, maybe he's right. Like, it's not a very good roster. But he's wrong.
He's wrong about winning. He's also notoriously cheap in the areas where you can win for pennies on the dollar compared to free agency. Like, he just has a completely misguided understanding of how a successful baseball team is actually built.
It's like, he's he's more like the NBA style where he's like, oh, if I buy stars, like, we'll be good. And, baseball is a little bit more about, underlying systems and good processes. And, he doesn't seem to invest in those. So I agree with you on that. But in terms of research, I've seen some different stuff, but winning drives attendance. I think it seems like pretty obvious. It's intuitive. I've seen the research that's peer reviewed on this one, and I'm like, winning drives attendance. That's what drives attendance.
It's also tough when you're in Southern California. You have the Dodgers nearby doing what they do, and you have the Padres also having a lot of success in the last half decade plus now. So, the bar is actually high. So you're clearly like the third team within your broader region. So that's not great. You've had Shohei Ohtani come and go without playing a playoff game in your franchise. You've had Mike Trout for his entire career without playing a playoff game in your franchise. So you've had top-end elite talent at very low prices and still been unable to put enough pieces around that to make it work. Now, as far as what they've done this offseason, as much as I think that they're a disaster as a franchise, I feel like working within the constraints of Artie Moreno as your boss, the front office, Perry Manassian's actually done pretty well, all things considered. Like, this is a weird offseason because on the hitting side, they brought in Josh Lowe, part of that big three-team trade, added some infielders for depth, Adam Frazier for one, Vaughn Grissom, more interesting than most. Maybe he finally gets a chance to fill a vacancy at second base. They re-up Yohan Moncada, who, when healthy, will play a lot at third. And they brought back Chris Taylor to be kind of a super utility guy. They lost Taylor Ward to get pitching help and Grayson Rodriguez. At the time, I think we both said, all right, like, that's actually kind of interesting given what you have. And that was before they brought in Josh Lowe to bolster the outfield group. Luis Rengifo just left as a free agent. He's in Milwaukee. Tim Anderson's gone. Kevin Newman's gone. Lamont Wade Jr.'s gone. Many people outside of Anaheim didn't even realize those guys were there. That's fine. So the core five now, Zach Neto, pretty clearly everyday guy at shortstop. Looks like a star. Nolan Shanuel continues to play a ton. We don't love him, but he's a fixture for them. Trout, when healthy, like, he's an everyday guy. Joe Adell had the power breakout last year. And then it's maybe a little bit of a question who that fifth player would be for the rule of five. It could be Jorge Soler, if healthy, because we're not throwing Logan O'Hoppe in there as the catcher, even though he'll play more than the typical catcher, thanks to his bat. And the other option might be someone like Josh Lowe, but you could also make the case that he's a big side platoon guy, which leaves the door open for someone else to round out that five if it's not going to be Jorge Soler.
I mean, yeah, it's tough to fill out this five. And that's why I've taken Josh Lowe in a bunch of drafts, because I feel like they may just settle on him because they don't really have great options for regular at bats otherwise, around the team. I guess another name that I should float out there is Christian Moore. He's a right-hander, and so he's probably not going to be on the big league team, at 23 years old and be a short side platoon guy. So he feels like a guy who's either going to be in the big leagues playing every day or in the minor leagues. And so I'm going to give Christian Moore a job here today. And I'm going to say that I'm a little bit excited about it. And not just because I took him just now in the listener league, but because he looks like there's been a very easy toggle. If you look now on YouTube at his 15-game rolling average chase rate and his production at the plate, every time his chase rate goes down, his production goes up. Every time his chase rate goes up, his production goes down. And it seems like that's going to be an easy lesson for a young player to learn, is that, I'm going to lock in an approach here. Plus, you're talking about a guy who was pretty well liked as a prospect, that has real power in terms of bat speed and max EVs and barrel rates and all those things. So if he can just get that strikeout rate to 30, 29 and get that ISO over 150, 160, that's an everyday player. That's a guy who could hit 230, 240 with 20 homers and 10 steals. It's valuable in a lot of leagues. And as a right-hander and a young player, seems like he could be headed towards that situation.
Yeah, Christian Moore is definitely interesting. I mean, you could look at Moore versus Grissom. If Moore gets sent down, maybe Grissom's that guy, unless they want to platoon Grissom and Adam Frazier, in which case...
I mean, Grissom is out of options, so he's in the big leagues. But there are, like Lowe being a lefty and Grissom being a righty, there are places where they could platoon, even if it's not the exact same position, or maybe it is. Maybe Grissom is being groomed to be a utility guy, where he backs up Moncada at third and he, platoon caddies for Lowe in the outfield. These are things that are on the table. I think if they were going to be a really competitive team, Grissom would be better cast as a utility guy.
Yeah, I think that's probably ideal. I wonder if they think he can play third, or if they can shuffle pieces around, play someone else at third, because Moncada's health track record is just so bad that you assume at least one IL stint at some point. So that's going to open up a lot of playing time, even if he initially projects as an everyday guy. Of the hitters, is there anyone you think is underrated besides Lowe and Moore? I mean, you kind of scratch the itch there with both of those guys, because relatively speaking, they're both inexpensive.
I think, he's slightly more expensive, but Neto had a really great season, with a bum shoulder. I mean, he's coming off of shoulder surgery. And so I think very least Neto could, put up 650 plate appearances this year. Playing time projections and Steamer is an actual playing time projection. Says 600, but it doesn't know that he was hurt last year, and that's why he came up short at the beginning of the season. I would say 650, 670. This is a guy that you needs to play every day, and he only had 550 last year. So even if he's just what he was last year, but with 100 more plate appearances, that's worth it. And with all of the projections the way they are, dinging him a little bit for that health, I think there's basically what I'm saying is there's something beyond what he's projected at. So you buy him at his projected cost, you actually are buying some upside.
Is Mike Trout appropriately priced now, or has he become underrated from a fantasy perspective? I was looking at the auction calculator. ATC in the auction calculator has him as the 138th hitter by just raw dollar values, which comes with 502 plate appearances. So if you nudge that up, that moves him up quite a bit. But obviously, we haven't seen much of Trout healthy over full seasons. It's been a long time. I mean, 556 last year was the closest thing we've seen to a complete season. That seems like kind of a max for him at this point.
It's interesting. How does he get there? Let's say he gets to 550 and Josh Lowe gets to 550. They're going to get there in different ways. Josh Lowe is going to be maybe healthy all year, but not starting and not starting this game and not starting this game. And so you're going to be playing that game where you're like, in daily leagues, it's much better where you can say, okay, Josh Lowe, it's a lefty today, I'm just not going to play him either way, Whereas Trout is going to he's going to start for, I think, most of the time when he's healthy, and then he's going to be missing large swaths of time. So it just seems like very specific to your settings of your league. Like, what can you handle it? Like, what will you do when Mike Trout goes down? Because, like, let's say you take him in a waiver wire league, 15-team NFC style. You get 2 good months out of him, and then he goes down with a hamstring injury. But they say it's like maybe a grade 2 strain, and they're thinking 4 to 6 weeks or whatever. What do?
That's a cut.
You cut him.
That's like around 12 or later pick with a month-long injury. He's probably a cut, especially because unless that's like really early in the season, and even then, you're probably going to have something else on your bench that's forcing the issue. You might have a guy that gets demoted, someone else that gets hurt. You want to stream, you want to chase closers. Like, I think you have to have that ability to let him go and just say, yes, I'm cutting Mike Trout, but I'm not cutting peak Mike Trout. I'm cutting this version of Mike Trout.
But if that's the case, then I think you should remove $1 or $2 of his auction value based on the fact that you may never get that. You will drop him when he gets injured. Like, he may get to 500 plate appearances with 250 in the early part and 250 in the late part, but you dropped him in the middle 100, so you don't get the next 250. You know what I mean?
I mean, the weird part is just that the stolen bases weren't there last year. He was just 2 for 2 as a base stealer with 556 plate appearances. If it's gone forever, then you look at the swing and miss we saw last year. Career worst 32% K rate. Projections I'll have him at or around 30%. Then he's a low average power guy with very little speeds, and
he actually looks a little bit like Jorge Soler in the projections.
Yeah, that's not great. And then you're like, well, I could just play the one red paperclip game and wait and get Soler later, and I get the same kind of player with maybe a less scary track record of bad health.
More recently. Yeah, I think, who gets more plate appearances, Soler or Trout, is a not fun game to play.
It's a weird game for sure, but the quality of contact's still there. 15.8% barrel rate, doesn't chase pitches outside the zone. It's just been a strange road for Mike Trout up to this point. I can understand the cases for saying he's actually a little undervalued and being excited about him at the current price, and I can understand the he's just not that guy anymore sort of take that people might put out there as well.
Can I put a Lodem play out there real quick that I don't,
Sure.
This is a little bit of a vibes situation, and
Always.
I don't really have great evidence for it, but I've been saying that I don't think Nolan Schanuel is a major league first baseman, and I'm not quite ready to undo that. I'm not going to give him first division regular status, but I'm beginning to come around to the fact that he could be an average-ish first baseman, and that he could start for these Angels all year. 24 years old, and the note says he spent considerable time in the offseason trying to improve his bat speed, which would be amazing because if you just give him league average power this year, all of a sudden you've got a 270 hitter with 20 homers and 10 steals, 8 steals. That is valuable in almost every setting.
Yeah, it plays, especially those deeper leagues. I think, we talked about second division regular. I mean, the Angels are projected to be a second division team very clearly. So you're like, what does a second division regular mean? Is he good enough to start for the Angels? Yeah, Nolan Schanuel is good enough to start for the Angels. And I think he'd be a big side platoon guy on other teams. Like, that would at least be pretty useful too. So he's been a little better than we expected. I do like the increased bat speed, or at least increased emphasis on trying to improve bat speed versus the off season of just standing a lot. That was like, I like
better plan, Nolan.
I like it in the sense of, sitting is bad for your general well-being, and I sit way too much, so I can appreciate that. But the bat speed does seem like a better area to focus on than merely standing, which is underrated. Like, you're standing a lot, you're on your feet a lot as an everyday big leaguer. So it's not the most ridiculous thing ever, but it was a funny story nonetheless. On the pitching side, are we actually excited about Grayson Rodriguez? Is he actually healthy this spring? Like, that's kind of the lingering question that's always there in the background. It seems like Grayson Rodriguez is actually healthy.
I mean, through a bullpen, doesn't appear to be facing restrictions, but hasn't been one of the first starters. I believe that his draft stock will rise with every time he goes out there and throws. There are some sleepers on this one. I mean, Jose Soriano is perpetually underrated, I think. Unfortunately, he has the kind of stuff that doesn't lead to strikeout rates. So he's capped in his, ability to really help you. But last year wasn't a great season. He was 130th best starting pitcher. I would assume he'd be a top 100 starting pitcher this year. But, kind of back end, still kind of a cool deep league guy. Kikuchi, will get you more of the strikeouts. But I think the walk rate is always an issue. The whip is always an issue. And so he's kind of a back-end starter. He was a 149th guy last year. I think he could be a top 120 guy. So, kind of deep league guys. Detmers, we've talked about, is, he changed his approach against lefties and went really slider heavy. But, that's 1 year of having a good approach against lefties. So I don't know how much you want to put, how many eggs you want to put in that basket. And then I really don't like any of their depth pitchers. This is where, if we're talking offseason grade, I'd be willing to give him B- C+ for, some of the small moves he's made. I kind of like getting Grissom. I kind of like getting Lowe. I like some of that stuff. I like getting Grayson Rodriguez. And I don't know, maybe the pitchers themselves, they have agency. They can choose not to go there. But you look at all the pitchers that went to the Padres, and you kind of feel like, the Angels got Manoah, and I'd take most of the pitchers that signed with the Padres for their, final spot over Manoah. And I would rather that the Angels had gotten a couple guys like that. So I don't know if they wanted to, or they just said Manoah's fine, or if the pitchers said, no, thanks, we'd rather play for the Padres.
I think part of why won't people go and just take the chance of pitching there? I mean, if it's your only option to start, then sure. But yeah, I'd rather take the flyer on Tristan McKenzie or German Marquez or Walker Buehler, because in the case of Buehler too, I know it works in the bullpen. We saw a little bit of that last year in Philly. So you have that option if you're a contending team. And I think that's the other part of this. They're not a contending team, though. Like, if you don't know what your role is going to be as a veteran, or I think there's a chance you're not going to make a team, you'd rather not make a team that's maybe playoff bound than go get booted off a roster for a team that's probably not going anywhere.
Yeah, that's right. Like, if you don't make the team in Anaheim, where's your next spot is Colorado as a pitcher, it seems like. So the other part of it is, like, we were working on something about Patrick Bailey in San Francisco, and we talked to a couple former San Francisco pitchers, and they said, no, I didn't necessarily go to San Francisco because of the park or Patrick Bailey. I went because they used to have a good reputation for developing pitching. And so I think that oftentimes that's another thing that investing in coaching, investing in player development can do for you, is it can be a recruiting tool where now people, like, you sit down with guys like Walker Buehler, you sit, and you make a plan, you give them a plan. You say, if you sign with us, this is what we're thinking about doing, this, bop, bop, bop. You sit down with Ruben Niebla, who's one of the best pitching coaches in the big leagues, and he says, this is what I would, this is what we could maybe try. You don't have that in Anaheim, where people are like, I want to go there because pitchers go there and get better.
Case in point, how about a veteran like Yusei Kikuchi, who spent time in 2 different organizations in 2024, right? He's a Blue Jay, gets traded to Houston. The stretch with Houston was absurd, 76 Ks in 60 innings, 270 ERA, .93 whip. But even his time in Toronto that year, a 26.2% K rate and a 6% walk rate. That was an extension of what he had done the year before in Toronto, which was kind of the best version of Kikuchi we'd seen in the big leagues. He goes to Anaheim. K rate falls all the way to 22.5%. Walk rate goes back up to 9.6%. Immediately, year one. And was he talking about the air conditioning was not working too?
Yeah,
it's like all these things. It's coaching and player development, scouting, it's facilities. I mean, the ways in which they screw it up, like, in every possible way. So how could they be an organization that makes people better?
Makes me feel this way about Detmers too. I hesitate to be like, oh yeah, Detmers, great sleeper, because I'm like, we've seen this show before.
Yeah, it didn't work before. He worked great in the pen last year after a few bumps early in the season. So if there's a team other than the A's and Rockies where I'm just kind of steering away from the pitching staff entirely, it's probably this team right here. It's the Angels.
I'm taking some shares of Robert Stevenson. I know I'd rather do it in waiver wire leagues, but Robert Stevenson for your bench, or if you were desperate for saves like I was in Barf, if he's healthy, I think it's pretty clear that he's the closer. He has the best stuff in that bullpen. He's not a lefty like Pomerantz. I know that if he's healthy, he's huge. He had thoracic outlet type symptoms. He might be headed for that surgery. He's had all the surgeries, but I want to point out this is a walk year. This is a free agency year. This is the last chance to maybe get another deal. So he's got every motivation to stay out there on the mound. And if he's out there on the mound, he's the closer. So that's the best, Stevenson and really late darts at Detmers and Rodriguez. That's the best I can do, but I wouldn't, on the pitching side of this team, but I wouldn't, I would consider all my options greatly before I went to those.
I think about the struggles of Logan O'Hoppe defensively too, and you just think even at the big league level, they don't necessarily have all the things figured out that you'd like them to have figured out. So it's about discounts if you are taking shots there. I want to see how fast they move Tyler Bremner through the minors. We've seen him go really aggressive with position player prospects. We'll see if Bremner actually gets a fast track to Anaheim as well, because otherwise you're running it back with Caden Dana and Jack Kahanowitz. I mean, maybe we'll see someone like George Clausen would be interesting to get in the big league at some point.
Poor command,
but maybe you could move that guy into the bullpen and let him be a late inning option. But I have a hard time even finding young players on the pitching side that I'm truly excited about for 2026, and a lot of that's just the organization as a whole. Dakota has a 66.7 win total for this Angels team. For all the trashing of the organization I just did, I got to be honest with you, that feels too cold. I don't know why I'm getting tricked here. Why am I more optimistic than 66.7?
Fourth worst WAR total projected.
I think that makes sense because Trout's not Trout anymore. Jorge Soler's old. It's kind of Neto, Shanuel, and some question marks in the lineup, and the pitching just doesn't look that good to me. It falls off pretty quickly.
Shortstop is the only place that they're above average in terms of being projected as a team. And I think that there's also, as much as I hear you, and I'm like, this is really bad. Are they really bad? This looks like a little bit better of a team than a really bad team. I'm just worried that this is a blow it up team if they're not good. And
maybe
I
some
don't know.
of this is the quality of the division. Seattle's really good and projects really well. Houston's still solid at worst. The Rangers, I think, were a little bullish on overall. And the A's have a good group of young hitters and some pitching that might actually be a lot better than what they trotted out there last year. You can see how they're clearly the fifth team in the division, even if maybe we're quabbling over 66-7 versus 71 wins projected. It's bad nonetheless.
Yeah, I think it's directionally correct, so I'm going to give it a just right. You know what I mean? I don't. What am I going to say? It's like 3 or 4 wins better than this. But for all the risk that they could be 3 or 4 wins better than that projection, there is the risk that they are near that projection and sell and perform poorly over the last 2 months of the season and drop below it. You know what I mean? It's not a great bet. It's like one of those ones that maybe your betting model is oh, mine spits out 2.3 wins more. It's yeah, but what happens in the last 2 months of the season if they decide to sell and they don't really have great young talent that's going to come in and perform better?
Yeah, and I think there's a constant pressure on the front office to win now, which is why they rush prospects and it's why their system doesn't look good. But again, if you're being undercut by ownership at every turn, there's just not much you can do. So off-season grade for me, you could throw a C on it if you want to, because I could tell myself a story that Grayson Rodriguez ends up being a really smart move and that Josh Lowe ends up being good. But the grade gets dragged down because they're so far behind and it's Artie's fault.
Yeah. Yeah, C. I'm okay with the C.
Good luck. Sorry, Angels fans. I really wish things were better for
I really
you.
don't want to be a bummer. I mean, I think Teodosio is a great defensive center fielder, and I think Neto is a really a good young player. So there's reasons to go to the ballpark, but
Yeah, kind of. I mean, I don't know. Are there? I mean, like, even when you like bracket
to see
them,
the other team.
yeah, right. There's someone else playing, so I don't like being mean, but this franchise thing, I just can't stand this anymore. This is the same crap year over year over year.
And they don't have the
for this
excuse of the ballpark that Colorado has, you know? Like,
No,
this
they
is
don't.
a normal ass ballpark. And I, you mentioned the sort of like potential problems with like the Dodgers and Padres, but I don't know, like there are millions and millions of people in Orange County. Like,
oh, it's huge. Yeah. Here's the thing that bothers me the most. If you're an Angels fan, this is why you should consider not being an Angels fan until Artie actually sells the team. They're on track right now to be 15th in payroll. That is the worst they've been ever in Artie Moreno's ownership tenure. They're spending less and less every year. This will be the third consecutive season where they're not above 10th in payroll. This is in a huge media market. So it's just like mind-boggling. You couldn't spend money as a professional baseball team worse than Artie Moreno spends it.
yeah, and I mean, like Dodger Stadium, if you live in Anaheim or Tustin or, any of those spots, Huntington Beach, Dodger Stadium's like an hour and a half away. And, and then you're adding traffic and San Diego is, it's just hours and hours of sitting in traffic. So like find your niche, get those people out there. I think it's possible. It's just not with this team.
Got to start over with a new ownership group to get there. But that is not on the horizon, at least in the immediate future. So hopefully something changes soon. We are going to go. Just a reminder, on our way out the door, you can join our Discord. The conversation continues in there. If you got some things you do like about this Angels team, we'd love to hear it. We prefer positivity, all things being considered. That's going to do it for this episode of Rates and Barrels. We're back with you on Tuesday.
Thanks for listening.